Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. Fans of Cleveland's professional baseball team will no longer be allowed inside the ballpark wearing Native American headdresses or face paint. This new policy goes into effect on Monday at the home opener against Detroit. It's the team's next step as it plans to change its controversial name. Fans must also cover up or remove any offensive imagery, or they could be removed or refused admission. Cleveland fans will still be allowed to wear ball caps and clothing featuring Chief Wahoo, Cleveland's former racist mascot. The team removed the wide-grinned, red-faced cartoon character from its game jerseys and caps, but it still sells merchandise with the image. Kansas City's pro football team announced a similar ban of headdresses at its stadium. Team owner Paul Dolan says the new name will not have Native American themes or overtones to it. The Montana House votes down a bill that would have made it easier for Native Americans to vote. The bill could have reduced travel time for tribal citizens to access voting services by requiring at least one satellite elections office to be available on each reservation in the state. There are 7 reservations in Montana. According to the Billings Gazette, at least one tribal leader objected to the bill because it was a watered-down version from its original form. Tribal leaders hope to reintroduce a new bill next year. The city of Ashland, Oregon is starting a new tradition. At the beginning of city meetings, council members now acknowledge the Native American tribes the city replaced when it was founded. Ashland is in the far southern part of Oregon. Mayor Julie Akins opened the March meeting with this statement.
We'll read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and honor the Aboriginal people on whose ancestral homelands we work, the Ikaruxim Band of the Shasta Nation, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. We honor the first stewards in the Rogue Valley and the lands we love and depend on, tribes with ancestral lands in and surrounding the geography of the Ashland watershed include the original past, present, and future indigenous inhabitants of the Shasta, Tequilma, and Athabascan people. We also recognize and acknowledge the Shasta village of Quakaka, where the Crow lights that is now the Ashland City Plaza.
The mayor says it's only right to acknowledge who was here first.
That we bring the voice of Indigenous people into all of those conversations. And we bring the voice of everybody into all of those conversations. And heretofore, we hadn't been. So this is just a foot in the door. It's the beginning and certainly not the ending.
Mayor Akins is asking lawmakers nationwide to create their own land acknowledgements. Citizens of the Kaska Nation in northern British Columbia are raising alarms over a proposed mine in the Yukon. At stake are migration paths of the Finlayson caribou who use the area during mating and calving season. APTN reports the region has millions of pounds of deposits, which BMC Minerals is banking on for its more than $380 million mining project. Ann Rader, who leads the Liard Aboriginal Women's Society, says the project could spell the end for the caribou. The herd historically numbered 100,000 and is now down to 1,500. Yet a spokesperson for the mining company says the research and monitoring of the area is being done to make sure the wildlife won't be impacted. The mine could be in production as soon as 2023. Well, a new film is hitting the screen next month called Alaskan Nets. It's set in Metlakatla, Alaska, which is an island in the southeast part of the state. It's also the only Indian reservation in Alaska, and it's home to the Tsimshian people. The documentary revolves around two cousins, Danny Marsden and DJ King. The two lead their high school basketball team to a state championship for the first time in more than 30 years. Chris Pratt is the executive producer of the film. He's also known for his role in Guardians of the Galaxy. Pratt posted on social media that he grew up in Alaska and his babysitter, Rose, is Alaskan Native. He says her three boys were his best friends. The film is having its world premiere next month in the documentary competition at the Santa Barbara Film Festival. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalohungva. When we come back, we're going to hear about some representation about Native Americans.
There's been studies over the year that says invisibility is a problem, and we'll talk to Crystal Echohawk about that. We'll be right back. Native representation in the media is challenging. From actors donning headdresses to athletic teams refusing to give up their names, an organization is providing education to the public about the history of oppression and stereotypes. Crystal Echohawk is the executive director of IllumiNative, the first and only national Native-led organization that's focused on changing the narrative about Native people on a mass scale. From the Pawnee tribe of Oklahoma, Crystal built IllumiNative to use data-based research to illuminate the voices of contemporary Native peoples to disrupt the invisibility and toxic stereotypes we face. The Ford Foundation recognized her work this month for challenging the status quo, tackling injustice in communities and beyond. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you, Mark. Great to see you.
And congratulations on Ford and also People magazine.
Yeah, it's I feel like media has discovered Native American women finally for Women's History Month. So it was a surprise and an honor.
IllumiNative really grew out of the report that you worked on that really looked at stereotypes and issues. Maybe talk about that journey and how where we got to where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, I think we founded the Reclaiming Native Truth Project in 2016. It's a project I founded and co-led, to really map what are the dominant perceptions that Americans and key institutions that impact our lives in Indian country. What do they think about Native people? Why do they think that? And how do those perceptions actually impact us, from the courts to Congress to every day, our representation in media. And, with that, we found, some really key findings that, invisibility is one of the greatest, challenges that we face, that the majority of the American public knows little to nothing about us. Some aren't even sure if we still exist. And what little they think they know is really driven by false narratives and really toxic stereotypes that we see showing up in pop culture and media. And, one of the biggest culprits, K through 12 education. And so really understanding that all of these things in terms of the invisibility, the stereotypes and misinformation actually fuels, bias and racism against our people. And so we founded IllumiNative once we published the research in 2018 to really be a vehicle to translate that research into action. And it's hard to believe that it's almost been 3 years now since we published, and to really see how, not only have we been able to get out that research in the world, but just it's been exciting to see people in Indian country take that data and really within their own communities and their own institutions really fight to say, enough is enough. No more stories without us, and to really show people who we are in the 21st century.
Well, it's so compelling to have data be the way to transmit that information. It's not just about pop culture or stereotypes. It's about, here are the facts, deal with it.
Yeah, and that's really what it's taken. It's, and it's sometimes ludicrous that we need, data and research to tell people what is racist and what's impacting our people, and I think that's always, most people in this country, or so many people in this country, I should say, often treat us like children, like we don't know our own minds. And, we're constantly told that these these, misrepresentations or racist sports mascots are ways of honoring us, and we just don't know better, right? And so it's taken, a lot of things, including data, to really push back on that, the science. And I really just cannot give enough credit to Dr. Stephanie Freiberg for her groundbreaking research that has really been such an important part of the battle to begin to really defeat things like mascots and other, harmful representations of our people.
One of the extraordinary things about data that I think is fascinating is that right now, Congress has more representation than the news media.
Right. That's the world we're living in. But, I feel like we've got some momentum, I feel like, we've come out of a really tough year in 2020. And I know we're still facing tough times, but I feel like on the landscape of representation, we've made some pretty big strides. There's a long way to go, as you noted, right, in sectors like media, but I think things are starting to change.
This has been an extraordinary year for sports franchises. Maybe talk about your work there.
Yeah, and I think, the big news obviously in 2020 was, the change of the Washington, football team name, and shortly followed after by the Cleveland baseball team, but, they became more solidified, within this last 6 months, year. But, I think the one thing we can't forget, a couple things, is that, as we all know, that is a decades-long fight, led by people like Suzanne Shown-Harjo, Amanda Blackhorse, and just thousands and thousands of people over time who took to the streets and fought the battles in their own school districts to protest outside of stadiums, and it really was, the kind of the perfect storm of, unfortunately, it took the murder of George Floyd. I think, with COVID, it just electrified this conversation, and it just happened to be that this kind of perfect storm came together, obviously back in July, and we were, happy to be one of a lot of people at the time that just rallied, and we all worked together to organize and really create a social groundswell, and link arms with the investor group led by First Peoples Worldwide and Carla Fredericks, and that entire group of people have been working on it for a long time to really force the change. So I think it was just such a powerful story about when we come together as Indian country and we organize and we push, and also when we can really call in our allies as well to stand with us, that big things are possible.
Speaking of big things, and there's always hope that media is going to get it and suddenly there'll be these great shows, but we're on the cusp of some great shows. I mean, I'm really struck by programs like Rutherford Falls coming online that actually have the potential to tweak some of these really amazing, deeply seated narratives.
I am so excited for Rutherford Falls. I mean, 2021 is, it's unreal, right? It's finally happening. This has been such a long, hard, fought battle over decades to get that level of representation. So, Rutherford Falls premieres on April 22nd. Hopefully, folks, if you haven't seen it, check out the trailer. It's hysterical. And a lot of just groundbreaking breakthrough moments. I mean, Sierra Ornelas, as the first Native American woman showrunner, Navajo showrunner, more than half of the writer's room is Native. Janice Schmieding as the co-star with Ed Helms. And, I think it's going to be amazing. And it's going to be one of the first opportunities that the greater American public is really going to see contemporary Native representation that's, really authored by Native peoples. And it's a hilarious show. I mean, it's not only a breakthrough moment for Native representation, it's just a hilarious show that I think really is going to be a big hit. And then we have Reservation Dogs coming out, either later this year or early 22 by Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi. Again, all Native writers' room, and Native directors. I just saw some posts recently where I think some of the Native directors have landed here in Tulsa. They're getting ready to start shooting. We also have Spirit Rangers on Netflix. And then, there's the pilot in development called Sovereign for NBC that Bird Running Water, Ava DuVernay, and Sydney Freeland and Shazbin have been working on. So it's amazing. It's really exciting.
Well, we only have about 30 seconds left, but you've written that invisibility is not a superpower, and now it's really coming to fruition in that sense.
You know what, Mark? Visibility, right? Visibility and building our power through representation is what it's all about for Indian country. And I am so excited.
Crystal Echohawk, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Mark.
There are only 3 states in the country that have a paid holiday honoring Native Americans and Native Hawaiians. When we come back, we'll learn more. There are only 3 states in the country that have an official holiday honoring Native Americans and Native Hawaiians. Senator Jamescita Peshlakai recently worked the Arizona legislature with legislation that was signed into law for Arizona. She joins us now. Senator Peshlakai, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy and honored to be with you today.
Tell us how you got this bill through the legislature and what it does.
Well, you know, as a veteran, Diné woman and a veteran of Desert Storm during the Persian Gulf War, I felt it was really important to honor our Navajo code talkers and really all Indigenous warriors of the United States, and honor their courage and sacrifice and what they have done for democracy. So I have been running legislation to introduce a Navajo Code Talker Day here in the state of Arizona for a couple of years. I was in the House in 2013, and we did have legislation back then, but it was never successful until this year. And I have worked many years to lobby for support in the legislature, both in the House and the Senate. And it got to the governor's desk and he signed it. So I'm very happy about that.
Why do you think the cards were there this year? What made it possible?
It's about educating. You know, the code talkers, the program was top secret. It was declassified in 1968. My hope is to have New Mexico and Utah do the same thing, follow in our footsteps, and then hopefully, you know, the other 49 states and U.S. territories, because this was indeed a worldwide, courageous and impactful sacrifice by our Navajo code talkers.
Senator, you mentioned making sure that all Indigenous warriors were recognized, and of course other tribes, including the Hopis, had code talkers. How did they get into this legislation in a way to make people understand that it was not just Navajos, but broadly?
Well, for centuries, Native Americans have been in every conflict in the Americas, starting with the Revolutionary War. And in World War I, the Cherokee and the Choctaw had code talkers. And so many tribes were a part of the movement, which ultimately culminated in a very formal and official program, which is the Navajo Code Talker program. So the Hopis and other tribes had unofficial programs that were not top secret and not separately funded, which makes the Navajo Code Talker unique, because they were part of an official top secret program within the Marine Corps. They had their own separate base, their own separate instructors, and they developed textbook codes that could be recognized by all allies. Well, maybe not all allies, but at least the comms portion of the US military. And so that makes them different. And from what I understand, they had an MOS, which is different from all the other tribes. So it was the other tribes were part of the journey that culminated into the Navajo Code Talker program.
Thank you, Senator, so much, and congratulations on your legislation.
Thank you, Mark.
When we come back, how are tribes in the Northwest doing? Brian Bull from KLCC FM will give us some insights on issues when we come back. Brian Bull joined the KLCC news team in June of 2016. In his 25 years as a public media journalist, he's worked at NPR, Twin Cities Public Television, South Dakota Public Broadcasting, Wisconsin Public Radio, and IdeaStream in Cleveland. A member of the Nez Perce tribe, Brian is an award-winning journalist. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Mark. Good to see you.
We've been hearing a lot about the pandemic, but we'd like to hear about some other stories going on in the Pacific Northwest right now. What are some of the stories you've been covering?
Well, one of the more recent stories is a big development for Oregon, and that is that the state now has the first tribally run and operated opioid recovery clinic in Salem, its capital. And the tribe that is running it is the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, which has contended, like so many communities, with the opioid problem for many, many years. It's been very distressing for a lot of families, a lot of individuals. And so just late last month, they had a ribbon cutting ceremony, and they are now open for assessments for tribal members and other people in the community who may be suffering from opioid addiction.
The demographics for opioid, particularly in the Northwest, but in many parts of Indian country, are higher than the population. So is there a sense of urgency about this?
There is a sense of urgency, Mark. There was a CDC study that came out a few years ago that showed that between 1999 and 2015, there was a more than 500% spike in opioid-related deaths for Native people. And that is the worst hit group by the opioid epidemic. And they also have a study out by the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse that show that Native people were twice as likely to become addicted to drugs and alcohol than the general population, and 3 times more likely to die of an overdose. And so the operators of this clinic are very excited and very hopeful that they can turn things around. And one of the big selling points for this is that it's very culturally attuned. People who check in can request smudging. They can do art therapy, which includes the construction of dream catchers. And when they built and dedicated the clinic, there was also drumming and an elder who came to bless the clinic. And so they really try to meet people from their cultural perspective. And I know that there have been a number of other organizations that have done this. The Muckleshoot tribe in Washington State, they've been doing this now for about 11 years. And they say that one of the great things about having a culturally themed and culturally attuned recovery program is that you build a sense of community, you have a sense of family, and then you're also very familiar of cultural values and even the calendar. The Muckleshoot gave an example where they may prescribe Suboxone for people recovering from addiction. But if their members are going out on the canoe journey, the annual canoe journey, or if they're part of the annual fishing tradition, then they may prescribe it for a month as opposed to just a week. And so research has shown that more culturally themed and attuned treatment programs stand a much better chance of recovery.
And that really gets to the challenge that it's both a behavioral health issue, but also a chemical issue, and trying to find the right mix of therapy and pharmaceuticals to address the problem.
Absolutely. In fact, medication-assisted therapy is viewed as one of the most effective means of combating addiction, particularly opioid addiction, which includes heroin. And so there's a lot of high expectations for this clinic. Again, they just opened in late March. And so now that they're open for assessments, they're waiting for people to come to the clinic. And one of the other points I asked to when I talked to the operators is that it's off of the Confederate Tribe of the Grand Ronde Reservation. It's in Salem, which, you know, the tribe serves a 6-county area, which includes Marion County. But I asked if this was deliberate so that people may be able to go to the clinic so that maybe they have a little more distance, a little more privacy. And one thing they really want to emphasize is that they don't try to put any stigma or shame to addiction. They say that's part of the problem. But one of the big things, you know, you mentioned not wanting to hear too much more about COVID-19, but one of the big issues that they are looking at right now that they hope to address is the fact that COVID-19 does isolate people. And so that seclusion may exacerbate some of the problems that people have when they're trying to address addiction issues.
I can certainly see that. What are you working on now, Brian?
Well, the other item that we're looking at is called the Western Tribal Water Infrastructure Act of 2021. Oregon Senators Ron White and Jeff Merkley are involved with this. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get a bill to the president's desk that will basically expand a water rights act that was passed a few years ago. But this one would improve water services on many reservations, including Warm Springs. They're trying to make the Indian Reservation Drinking Water Program permanent and increase its funding from $20 million a year to $50 million a year, because there are some very long-standing water infrastructure issues on many reservations in the West.
Thank you, Brian Bull.
Thank you, Mark. Be well.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. We'll be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahan.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.